One of the most basic human needs is the need for social belonging. And to satisfy that need, we will step across that line between good and evil, between what we know is right and usually do and what we know at some level is wrong and we shouldn't do. But just this once, we're going to step across because the group is pushing us in that direction. The other thing about the human mind is it has infinite power to justify any behavior, either before doing it to say, here's why we have to do it, then after you do it, it says this is why we had to do it. Human beings are more rationalizing than rational. That is, we like to think we're rational, we weigh the alternatives, but in fact, what we are people who can re-explain anything after the fact to make it fit some good social values. So it's the perversion of the incredible power of the human mind that can do almost anything. All the magical things the human mind does in terms of creativity can get perverted to justify any evil, any transgression.
Please, stand outside. Can you tell something about the third wave, the experiment you did? I mean, when did you realize that it's going out of control for the students in school?
For years I tried to hide from it, avoid it, not discuss it. It's a responsibility to really try to understand what is good and what is evil.
I thought it would be a one-day exercise. It turned out to be a one-week existence in terror, actually.
My ego was inflated and my sense of power and control was elevated, and I liked it. That's the problem. But I'm at least aware of that.
I was liking it, the adulation, the power, the control. By the fourth day, my wife was saying to me, you have to stop this. It is very dangerous.
What Ron Jones, as far as I understood, was trying to do is have American students of the 60s appreciate the ease with which similar students in Germany became part of Hitler's youth.
I stumbled upon a bit of human nature and psyche. Why do we give up our freedom for the thought of being better than everyone else? And it's a lesson that we all need to see and hear and talk about.
I've seen websites where they want to take the students and test them all and see if they're normal. And I've seen websites that think we were all the websites where they bought the fictional version think we were all really, truly nasty kids, which we were not. I think it was a fascinating experience, and it's been a long time since I've been able to talk about it with any of my friends who were in the class. Palo Alto in 1967 was already a high-tech center, already a very professional middle-class, upper-middle-class community.
People moved to Palo Alto during this time to have their kids come to school and to be in the Palo Alto school system.
We grew up and took it for granted. We had the best schooling, I think, probably in the country.
The students were extraordinarily socially aware. There was an aliveness and activity orientation to be involved with society and contemporary issues that I had not encountered prior to coming to live in Palo Alto.
I remember when JFK came to town, there was a motorcade and it went by our school, so there was a lot of very patriotic feeling, but then the Vietnam War was happening, so you were trying to balance both of those.
Again, this all changed in a matter of months, weeks and months after the wave. But at the time of the wave, we were mostly clean-cut, well-behaved 15-year-old kids with a charismatic teacher that we trusted and loved.
When I first met Ron Jones, I thought, God, he is so young. He's like one of us.
I hired Ron Jones. He was exactly the teacher I needed for a slot, because he had an MA from Stanford, he had good academic credentials, and at Palo Alto that was important.
Coverly was a great school because it was closer to the East Side, and it had an eclectic kind of population.
and it had a tradition for being a very innovative school. So I felt very fortunate to be there.
He did innovative things too. He was bringing guests to the class, very interesting, controversial guests. He brought in a communist, he brought in a Klansman, he brought in a member of the American Nazi Party to talk about white supremacy.
All the way through, he was presenting different sides of every question. I remember when we studied about Vietnam, he made us write 10 arguments for, 10 arguments against.
He didn't try to be above you. He tried to, I would say that Jones had a capacity to teach with you.
When he said he did simulations, I realized that's a lot of what he lived for. He liked creating the experience of being there.
It was always exciting. One day you'd go in and the desks were in a row, and then the next day you'd come and they'd be all spread all over the room.
He had what I called stage presence. I didn't know at the time that he was an actor and a fiction writer, but he commanded the front of the classroom like a skilled actor.
In the 60s, lots of people were experimenting with experiential teaching. That is, instead of didactic teaching, where a teacher comes in and says, let me tell you what I know, it's creating settings, situations in which the students would participate.
I felt that students could feel something and work with it. That'd be better than simply reading about it. So I tried to develop simulations.
In March 1967, here at Cubberley High School, in the 10th grade at about age 15, we were taking a contemporary world history class from our teacher, Mr. Jones. The topic in March was the world before World War II, and in particular, Germany at the time.
Often, we never really knew where Ron Jones was going to take us when he went down some of his paths for education.
My memory of the third wave was that we were asking Mr. Jones, as we were finishing up one unit of study, what are we going to study the next day? Because we were so fascinated by his teaching, by his lectures. We couldn't wait to hear what was next. How unusual was that? But that's how excellent and dynamic his teaching was.
I think he approached it from the standpoint of we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to do a little bit of perhaps role playing. And so it was very unthreatening.
I remember clearly from him and classmates that if we followed what was asked of us, we'd all get A's.
You needed good grades to get into college, and you actually needed specific classes, and so you needed to pass this class.
The other thing would have been to go to the library, which was, I thought you got diseases there, you know, so I never went to the library, but I stayed in the class and did what I had to do for a grade. It was that simple.
He said that if we were active party members, we would get an A. If we were passive party members, we would get a C. If we tried a revolution and failed, we would get an F, but if our revolution succeeded, we would get an A.
The first 2 days of the experiment, Mr. Jones was not the usual Ron Jones. It's funny, he didn't quite have the smile in his expression. He didn't quite have the smile in his eyes either.
This was totally out of character for him. We had known him for 6 months, half a year, and he was always smiling. He was charismatic and a lot of fun to be around. So when he came in and was not smiling, it was very unnerving.
Sometimes we'd go outside to study certain things. Sometimes we would do roundtable discussions, but he came in with a very structured idea.
So I cleaned the room, put the desks in order. I took down all the projects, played some Wagnerian music, darkened the room, and introduced the students to discipline.
Well, I like classical music, and I don't remember any Wagner or German music being played.
He wrote on the board the idea, the concept of strength through discipline, how it's through discipline and practice that athletes were able to perform all the things they did.
He did have us sit at attention at the seats, as opposed to just sprawling all over, as is the usual thing you do in high school.
He talked about how when you sat straight and sat at attention, you could breathe easier. When you breathe easier, you could concentrate better, and your answers are more concise.
The moment he said that, the entire class shifted their posture, and here they all were sitting bolt upright with their feet on the floor and their arms to their sides.
That was actually pretty comfortable for me because I play the harp and you have to you know, was like, okay, this is, you know, there's certain things about your body energy when you sit up straight, and this is all fine with me. And
one of the first things that he did for us was give us an exercise where we put our hands behind our back and lock them together.
We're going to look forward, straight ahead, and everybody thought, okay, this is kind of fun, you know. I can play along with this.
That was easy for me to sign on to, you know. There is a certain strength that comes from discipline. The question is, to what end?
Then he wanted to see how quickly we could be disassembled outside and then race into the room and sit still like this, which he was calling sitting at attention.
It was chaotic, like the first time the students went outside the room and came back in, they could come back any way they wished. So there's the tumbling and falling and bouncing into people, desks falling over.
And so we tried this over and over again, just as a joke, as a game, but indeed it worked.
He timed us coming back into the chairs. We all sat down and everybody's bumping into each other and sitting down and sitting at attention like this and looking. And then Mr. Jones would look at the stopwatch and say, I think we can do it faster.
Try to be disciplined. You know, try to move smoothly, try to move cleanly, try to get to your seat and sit down promptly. And there's boom, boom, everyone's sitting down.
Each time we came in, we did a little bit faster, and Mr. Jones was ready to move on. He said, okay, I think we've done it. And one of the students yelled out, Mr. Jones, I think we can go quicker. And so we all got up and we did it again. And that was just that little moment was a little bit of a sign that maybe the kids were really getting into it. Maybe we were getting into it pretty strongly, a little too fast.
Now, up to this point, Ron Jones had allowed us to call him as Ron or Mr. Jones, however we wished, but he was open to Ron. From this point on, we were just to refer to him as Mr. Jones.
Well, I entered the class the second day, and I really anticipated that the class would be back to normal. There'd be this hubbub of excitement, and we would discuss the first day. But to my surprise, the class was kind of sitting there. And they had these like zipper-like smiles on their faces, you know, and these little twinkle in their eyes.
So when we all gathered in the class on the beginning of the second day, which was even before Ron Jones came in, we did all go to our places. We did all stand by our seats, and we were all quiet.
Ron was making it up day by day as he went along. It wasn't like a lesson plan that he had.
So spontaneously, I went to the blackboard, and strength through discipline had already been there, and I wrote down strength through
community. And that's when he was talking about La Raza, the people who build houses together versus the individual.
La Raza, a movement, a cause, building a barn together, doing something together as a community. The idea of a community being more important than the individual. And then I gave the students the feeling of being a part of the group by whispering together, or chanting together, or just stomping feet together. Just this raw, guttural feeling of being a part of something bigger than oneself.
They had the SLA going on, you had the Black Panthers, you had a lot of things like this going on.
The idea, perhaps, if we all shared a grade as opposed to an individual grade, and how good it would feel to go home with an A as opposed to a C+. And I think that really affected some kids. You know, God damn it, I've been getting a C+ all my life, and I'm going to go home with an A to my parents. I'm in this.
So we would get together outside of class and do homework together and turn it in as a group.
I thought that was great because I didn't have to study. We basically got to do certain things, and it seemed like a lot of fun.
Obviously, this was not as popular with the really good students because they, could, to some degree, could see their grades being compromised.
Grades, there was no threat. There was no threat involved with us sharing. If anything, it, again, got people who had not participated much in the class before to talk and be part of the class.
The fact that students were beginning to assist each other and come up with answers. For a high school teacher, all of a sudden I'm being flooded with accuracy of answers and a community that's generating these answers.
He also, in these first couple days, came up with the concept of, he would ask us a question. First of all, we would have to say Mr. Jones to start, and that our answers to these questions would have to be 3 words or less.
Very, very brief, cryptic, short, sharp.
If you have something to say, you get up next to your desk and address him properly. You know, good manners, nothing wrong with that.
What if we had a community where, well, of course, we'll need some kind of signature. So I created a wave salute.
And the salute was like this.
It was pretty much just like, and we had to do this, right, when we saw each other or something.
Well, it was a Hitler salute. I remember that.
Now that you're bringing this all back, it's like it's automatic.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the hand signal.
The salute was a curved hand representing a wave, and our organization was called the
Third wave. In beach lore, that means the third wave is the strongest, the most powerful.
And so with strength through discipline, we were the third wave.
He gave us our third wave ID cards.
And this was, again, I just reached in my drawer and there was a bunch of index cards. So I pulled them out and passed them out to each student.
And he said, all these cards are going to be blank except for 3 of them, which will have a red X on them.
With the idea that if you get a red X on your card, you're a little special.
You 3 are going to be the informants.
What I remember was that he actually used the word Gestapo.
You're to report to me anyone who doesn't go along with our community values, which was the salute if you saw another community member.
We were to salute each other as we passed in the halls. We were also to salute each other when we passed each other off campus.
If he did give out the cards, I don't have mine, and I've never seen one, and apparently none of them have survived.
This is a Strength Through Discipline membership card, and this was the one that I put together for the class.
And this was the one I made. I was very into psychedelic colors at the time. You know, I used to paint myself with all kinds of psychedelic colors. So I made a very psychedelic kind of card.
Another rule was to not gather in groups larger than 2, both in class and out of class and off campus, even at home.
I don't think we were to talk too much other than if you have a trusted friend, maybe bring them in.
It struck me as very dangerous for a movement to emerge in which people were not free to express what they thought, what they felt. They weren't, in a sense, it seemed, free to even have their own beliefs.
So anyway, he passed out all these cards, and 3 people got the red X's. However, as Mr. Jones disclosed later, more than 3 people were turning in names.
I'm a big question asker, and lo and behold, that is precisely what I did. I think I stood up by my desk and said, Mr. Jones, why can't we just say what we think? Why can't we just express our opinions about what we think about the third wave? And at that point, he said, you to the library for the rest of the semester.
Things that did, I do remember that happened in my class. Somebody indeed was sent to the library. That people were, and more than one time, people were banished from the class.
You were there 100% or you were not. And so if you even had a doubt about something he was saying and you mentioned that, he would send you out.
People would just disappear, and that no one was able to talk about it made it even more mysterious.
And it's not like you saw them after class or after school and saying, hey, what's this all about?
So I went off to the library feeling most dejected and outcast and really very intimidated. I think I felt like crying. Naively, I had believed him that he had in fact told all of the faculty that he would collect our names and kick us out. So I was fearful to tell the librarian why I was there, but she was really on me. She wanted to know, what are you doing here? You need to be in class. So I remember just taking a really deep breath and thinking, well, I've got to tell her, and okay, maybe she turns my name in, and I'm already out, I already have the F, so what else can they do? But it still was very intimidating to me, very much so, to tell her. But I did begin describing to her the nature of the movement as I had come to understand it in those first few days, and her response was one of great alarm. She shared with me that she had been born and raised in Nazi Germany and that this was the climate of her upbringing. And she said, this is so like that, and you can't take this sitting down, you have to do something. And I knew that I did have to do something, but I just hadn't been able to figure out what on earth that would be. And part of my dilemma in trying to figure it out was trying to think of what I could do that would have any impact that I could do in secret. That evening I went home and told my parents about this, and I have to give them credit because they said, well, what would you like to do? And the thing that came to my mind immediately was to make posters. About 8:30 in the evening, my father would drive me over to the high school campus. This was a very warm climate in Palo Alto, so all of the hallways were outdoors, and I could just go and put up posters. And so that first night, I just felt like, oh, at least I'm doing something. When I arrived at school the next morning, between first and second hours, I thought, I'm just going to take a quick spin around the school and just admire my handiwork and just see my posters. Much to my astonishment, there was not a single poster up. So I saw that within an hour of school starting, someone had been in charge of sweeping the school to make sure there was nothing negative about the third wave anywhere, and they had torn down every poster.
I don't remember ever asking a student to take down posters per se.
The next night, I went home after school and repeated my poster-making obsession behavior, and took a ladder to the school the next day. And each evening, that became the practice, is to lug a ladder to the school. So I would get the posters up just as high as I could. And even then, many of the posters still came down. I guess people would jump up and grab them. But there were some that stayed up, which was my secret and sort of silent triumph.
This organization was called the Breakers, who were trying to stop the third wave.
Actually, I used to live in Rhode Island, where there was a mansion called the Breakers when I was a child, and the breakers are waves. And then there's the pun of breaking the movement.
It was a mystery to me as to the breakers, who they were, what they were. It was one more mystery in that whole event.
On the third day of the experiment, Mr. Jones came in and he wrote Strength Through
Action, I believe. That was the third day. That was his lesson of the day.
Everything that he had been talking to us about the first 2 days with strength through discipline and strength through community really mean nothing unless there's action to go along with it.
We started making posters, especially because I was interested in art. That was one thing. I said, I can help out with that part of the experiment.
People would cut letters out of magazines and glue them onto pieces of paper, and then he put all these up on a wall in the classroom.
There were new flyers that you had to pass out.
He really just wanted us out there talking about it. There were tables set up in the corridors where members of the third wave from Mr. Jones' class would try to enlist other students.
My name's Rick Schloss. I was a senior at Coverly High School in 1967. It was between classes, and I'm walking down this hallway, and at this point I encounter a table like this, where there are two guys standing behind it. There is a banner on the wall, and the banner says the third wave. Underneath the third wave, it said strength through unity. At this point, one of the guys comes around the table and asks me if I'd like to join the third wave. Never heard of it before, don't have a clue what it's about. And when I asked him what it was, he said strength through unity. That's all he could tell me. I asked him again, so what do you stand for? The other guy chimes in, strength through unity. They constantly repeated this mantra without really telling me what this was about. At this point, I decided, no, I'm not interested. I'm going to walk away. And as I start to take a step away, one of the guys walks around the corner, produces a small spiral wound binder and a pencil. And what he's going to do is he wants my name. I refused to give him my name. The other guy started to move over like it was actually going to be confrontational. At that time, I was getting ready to go to battle. It looked like maybe it was going to be a fist fight right here in the hallway.
I even saw a fist fight about the third wave in the hallways. People became more and more impassioned.
My only feelings at that point were that we were in the right and the people who were picking the fights were in the wrong. That somehow they weren't really seeing what we were up to was nothing bad. It had a lot of energy and a lot of excitement and a lot of purpose. So when I heard that other students were fighting third wave members, my feeling was just that, well, they just don't know enough about what we're doing. And if they knew that then they probably would want to join.
I was trying to find out about the third wave as a Catamount reporter at the time. The people that I would ask questions about it would shut me down. They wouldn't tell me anything about it till I got a hold of the librarian. And she said she was going to talk to me about it the next week. And that Thursday, and this is a story I never told my mother or anybody else. That Thursday, two members of the car club came into the journalism office, and they knocked the breath out of me and told me not to write about it.
About midway through this third wave experience, I decided I would walk past the classroom at fifth hour just to see what was going on in the room. And to my shock, what I noticed was just standing room only in that class. The room was absolutely packed.
Everyone that couldn't find a seat pulled up a piece of floor. It was amazing, and there were always people waiting to get in, you know, out at the door.
All of a sudden, we started to get attention from juniors and seniors and people outside of our classroom wanting to know what was going on, what was happening, what was the third wave about.
Students from all the different levels within the high school were there, and there was just this emergence of passion in the room. People were just so excited, so electrified to be involved with this new movement, and it both amazed and terrified me.
I became frightened when I realized that there were students coming into the classroom from outside the original class, and I also knew that there were students from the other two high schools in the district that were thinking about joining the wave. I was privy to that kind of gossip. Those red X's that I had given everybody became this funnel of information. I knew everything that was happening. It was scary to know minute details about what someone was telling their parents or what someone was telling their best friend.
It's not enough to think a certain way. We have to act in a certain way. We have to be strong. We have to get rid of the weak people in the class. We have to get rid of the potential informers, the spies.
Yes, we were part of a group, but now we had finks out there.
I think there was an innate feeling of wanting to be accepted by your peers. I wanted people to like me. I think I would have been capable of many things that I would hate to admit.
The scareder they were of being caught themselves or being hurt, the more they gave up information on people. Things like that were going on, and it was a complete small little society of this going on. And it was dog eat dog for your grade. That's when you start finding out who were the good people and bad people, and a true person was actually the worst. There were people that were living and dying that it run their life, and they were doing everything exactly what Ron wanted them to do.
You shied away from people that were scoffing at it because you wanted to remain part of the group.
You never knew who might turn somebody in. And when there were these mock trials, you never know if somebody had actually turned the person in or if it was just made up.
In this classroom, with Mr. Jones at the head of the classroom and us sitting in our rows, he would come into the class and tell us that he had heard from the secret police and there had been violators that had to be tried that day. He would stand up in front of the class and he would say, so-and-so, and they would snap to attention at their desk and stand up next to their desk. You have been seen in the company of known revolutionaries. What do you have to say about that? And all of a sudden the class would start chanting in unison, guilty, guilty, guilty. Jones would go over to his desk, grab one of his ditto forms and says, you are hereby exiled to the library for the duration of the experiment. Whenever this class meets hereafter on a daily basis, you are to go to the library. You are never to come back to class. And that student would be escorted out the door and they'd be gone.
During one of the weeks, I think it was the second week, I had passed one of my classmates in the hall who was in the third wave, and she had given me the third wave salute, which I did not return, not being part of the movement. And I could see her face just turn, just this look of shock. And she said to me, Sherry, you didn't return the salute. So I just told her, well, I'm not in the movement. And she said, with a tone of disbelief, you're not? What? And I reiterated it. And from that moment on, she wanted to have absolutely nothing to do with me. Anytime we passed in the hall, she would look the other way.
Outside of class, I believe it was after the second or third day, I was with one of my best friends. And in that day, you know, we were saying strength or discipline, STD. Those were the initials, the acronym. There was a commercial out in that day. I think it was for Tide or for Ajax. I can't remember which one, but their slogan was stronger than dirt. So I told my best friend, I said, you know, STD means stronger than dirt. And he just laughed and all that. I was just making a joke about the third wave. And we went about our ways and everything. The very next morning, Mr. Jones has me stand up at attention. He says, Mr. Neal, I want you to stand up next to your desk. And he pulls out a piece of paper out of his pocket and he says, it's been said to me that you said STD means stronger than dirt. And I look at my friend who sat in front of me and he's just staring straight ahead, no smile or anything. And I realized, you know, Obviously, he had turned me in.
And then there was also the phenomenon of some students getting psychologically involved in it, well beyond a game. One of the students sat over here, very corner of the room, right by the door. And I remember he'd always sit there, even during lunch hour. No student should ever be alone. And this kid was just alone. And one day he followed me into the faculty room where he was addressed by the English teacher, Mr. Tanner. Mr. Tanner said, "You don't belong in here, you're a student." And this child turned to that teacher and said, "I'm not a student, I'm a bodyguard."
All of a sudden, there was a line crossed all over the place, and this wasn't about teaching students or running a simulation. This was out of bounds.
He would have bodyguards around him. So, of course, whenever we saw Ron Jones walking in the hallways, he would be getting salutes. He would be saluting. His bodyguards would be saluting, and we would be saluting back. So there's this group, this master and his group would be walking through the hallways and creating this wave of salutes as he went through.
So this is that kind of mixture of things happening. Some students just wanting to go along, some students joining because it might be fun, and some students taking it on as, this is my salvation.
It all went back to the way that many children were raised in that time period, where, they didn't get a lot of one-on-one personal time with their parents. There was no such thing as how are you feeling, and nobody cared how you were feeling. You just got the best grades you could, and you went on to college, and that would please your parents.
At that point, we knew we had slogans, rules, sense of direction, and we had a secret police to make sure we followed the rules.
I have a memory of the room being ransacked, I think on the 4th day.
Weird things were starting to happen around school. His room was vandalized.
I didn't do anything to vandalize the classroom, but I put posters up all over in the room. I think I taped posters on every desktop, and I wrote on the board.
By ransack, I mean that someone had just come through and just kind of torn down banners. But that was happening a lot. Banners being torn down, banners being put back.
Literally, the only topic I heard students speak about the entire day was, did you hear someone broke into the third wave headquarters? I would be walking down the hall and hear people at their lockers, people I had no idea who they even were, talking about this. Really, my fear was all the greater because I just felt like if someone finds out that I did it, then the danger is greater.
All of a sudden, from the very beginning of the 4th day, things were different.
Mr. Jones came into the classroom and closed the curtains and shut the door and locked it. He had a full-time bodyguard that was with him. By now, there were members of the car club who were acting as self-appointed bodyguards, and one of them stood by the door when it was locked. He turned out the lights, drew the curtains, and it was pretty dark in there.
At this point, he, I believe, expelled a couple people on the concept of performing mock assassinations. I believe they were taken out of the class at that time. And then he changed the whole process on us.
There was a little bit of a slant, a different change in his mood and how he was addressing us.
And you have to remember the class is jam-packed by now. You know, the individual classroom of Mr. Jones, room C3, was just lined with people, sitting in the aisles or standing by the windows, by the bench seats.
He told us that this was not a game. This was not something that just our class was in, but that teachers all over the nation were doing this in classes, and that we were going to get together and form a third political party in this country.
The trials were held to get the kids out who weren't really serious about it, and those of you who left are the strong ones who will take this student movement forward. It is, in fact, a national movement. There's 1,025 other schools doing this right now, and in those days there was no internet, so there was no way to fact check him, and nobody, oddly enough, nobody asked him to prove it either. We trusted him, or at least we weren't in a position to make waves.
This was happening in San Francisco. He said this is happening in Chicago. This is happening in Philadelphia. This is happening in New York. And because it was working so well, they were going to come out with their party leader the next day.
That changed the simulation. That changed it to being the stakes were raised and all of a sudden it was bigger than me. And it wasn't something that I could pull out of and have it stop.
The group had come together because of their disenchantment with our country after President Kennedy's death. Now, all the hopes that he had, and we had as a nation through the Peace Corps and development and civil rights, and you're saying there's now a new party being formed to take a lot of those values and bring them forward again because they've been lost. And of course, for us, they have been lost because there was the Vietnam War going on, and there were still civil rights problems, and there were still leaders being assassinated and killed left and right in our country.
I remember inside of myself thinking, I trusted the government that they were telling us the truth, and it was my first experience with political situations where we weren't fully informed and we didn't know necessarily everything that was going on. And I recall feeling betrayed a little bit by our government.
Our country was having economic problems, that we could do better economically, that we could do better politically, militarily, that there was a lot of weakness going on with our current administration. We were in a war that nobody wanted to be in, that we were going to find a better way, that we were going to get rid of those people in Washington who were not following what the mass of people wanted to follow.
And oddly enough, there was a Time magazine or some magazine that happened to have this thing called the third wave.
One of my fellow classmates from the back said, "Mr. Jones, what about this?" And it was a color ad, and it said, "The third wave is coming."
And I reached over and grabbed it and I said, "And this is the signal of action. And tomorrow we're going to have a rally. You're going to meet a presidential candidate that's going to explain the purpose of the wave. And this is our new leader. And we're going to rise up together and change the world."
Well, that was my magazine. I brought that in. It was a double page. There's some pictures on the bottom. There's something about third wave, and it kind of crossed the scene boundary in the middle.
That kind of helped decide me into the state of thinking this indeed is going to happen.
When he told us this was a real thing, a real youth movement, I don't remember any more about this youth movement, what it was supposed to be, but the fact that it was supposedly real, if this was how it was being run, I didn't want any part of it. And I didn't. I remember at that time feeling very frightened and very helpless and like, what could we do? Was there anything that could be done? And I remember talking to Mark a great deal about, you know, we were sort of comparing notes about what was going on and was there something we could do? And I didn't know. I felt really, wow, this was bigger stuff than I knew how to handle.
I believed it was possible because there were a lot of other things happening during the 60s of movements that had gone nationwide.
He said he wanted all of us to report the next day at noon to room H1, which was a big assembly hall. And on closed-circuit TV,
the National Party leader would come out on a limb and cut it off and announce the new student movement.
Mr. Jones then abruptly left the room, left us all alone in the dark. I remember one student jumping up. It was a girl, I think, and she was telling everybody to not go, that this was wrong. And I don't think anybody joined her. And I kind of looked around out of the corner of my eye, and I saw that everybody else was just ignoring her and staring straight ahead, which had a lot, you know, forced me, you know, to sort of keep going along with everybody and not, you know, disband at this point.
When we left that class that day, I and friends of mine were flabbergasted. My world had changed.
He was such a beloved, charismatic teacher. To have him say that this was a real thing, it was, I don't think I've ever felt so betrayed in my life.
When Ron Jones told us this was going to happen, he gave us a couple conditions. And the conditions were that we were not to talk about this upcoming assembly or that the third wave was a real political group. We were not to talk about that with anyone.
My mom's concern was mainly that somebody that was in authority was talking to the students and that some of the students were really getting into what he was saying and that this could cause an upheaval in our democracy, and she felt it was just the beginning of something bigger that she had seen happen with Hitler and so forth.
One of the rumors was that a kid had gone to their counselor and complained about it, and the counselor had turned them in to Jones and they'd been exiled. We never know who the student was, but the rumor was very effective at keeping us at bay.
I didn't let anybody know that I had gone to the counselor to speak with my mother, because I didn't know who had that connection with Ron, and they might say, oh, she knows, and so make sure she doesn't go to the assembly.
We usually talked about all kinds of things, politics, school, whatever, and we'd sit down to dinner every night. And they noticed this particular night that I was not very talkative and that I seemed to have something on my mind. So they asked me, and I told them, I said, maybe you don't want to go to work tomorrow. I said, I think it would be a good idea if you didn't. But if you do have to go to work, see if you can be by a television set at 12 noon, because I think something really major is going to be happening.
Well, the principal is pretty excited and elated by the wave, because it took all the discontents off the street for a second, out of the corridors. They were ending up in my classroom. So there seemed to be a calm about the school and an order that he really appreciated.
Ron Jones didn't keep me updated day to day as the experiment went along. I didn't expect him to. I had approved his approach, and I assumed that he would carry it through in a professional manner. And as I say, I did get 1 or 2 calls from parents in which I explained the purpose of the lesson, and that I thought it would be an excellent way to teach students the dangers of totalitarianism.
That afternoon when I was walking in the corridors, I saw a lot of the students, the senior students who were the long-haired radical protesters who had cut classes to come to the third wave. I heard them in the hallway saying, we're going to get the pigs out of Washington. We're going to get us out of Vietnam. And, you know, even though we were sophomores, we were 2 years away from the draft. Vietnam was a draft war. It wasn't like the Iraqi war. And in a couple of years, the government was going to hand us a gun and say, either kill or be killed. And so when I heard these guys saying, you know, we're going to get the people out of Washington who are responsible for this war, that motivated me to want to go to the rally the next day.
You didn't want to fail because there were all these other people counting on you. You didn't want to be the reason why it didn't progress.
And then we came in that morning to the class, and there was no teacher there. And we were all just sort of wondering what was going to happen. And then I believe it was 2 guys, it was at least 2, from the Executor Car Club, who were sort of his bodyguards, came in to escort us to the room where we were going to be watching this video. And I hadn't really planned it or anything, but I stood up and told everyone not to go, that it wasn't right. And they wrote my name down, and I remember feeling, oh my God, you know, what have I done? But only one other girl didn't go, Jeannie, was sitting right in front of me. And everyone else left, and I was I couldn't believe that everyone was going to really watch this rally. And I was very disappointed in myself, and yet I remember my heart was pounding, and I remember feeling Jeannie and I sitting looking at each other and like, what do we do now? And yet she turned to me, and I remember how she looked, and she was just so glad. I think she was really glad that someone had said something, because I don't think she didn't want to go, and maybe she couldn't have done it if it were just herself.
It was so exciting, you didn't want to be left out either. You wanted to see what was going on.
I thought, indeed, it was going to happen. I mean, I trusted, believed Ron Jones was telling the truth.
I didn't feel comfortable. I really didn't, and something big was going to happen.
When it was time to go to H1, I still wasn't sure if I was going to go through with this.
So I came into H1, and there were already people there.
I looked inside, and by now, it felt like 200 students were in there.
My assumption is maybe 200. It might have been less. All I know, it was filled up.
Word had spread. There were photographers taking pictures of everybody in the room.
Taking pictures of him and the bodyguards and looking out on the class.
And I remember my vantage point of being able to look down over everything, and Ron was down in the middle.
The lights were off, the room was quiet.
There were bodyguards at the doors, and because I saw everybody else there and it had grown, I decided to go in.
And I sat down, and there was just like nothing happening.
So I went into the classroom, room H1, and I remember Mr. Jones was in the front of the class, and everybody was sitting at ease, I think. At that point, he said, let us show everybody the extent of our training. So he had us all stand up at attention, and we all belted out in unison. Strength through discipline, strength through community, strength through action. And it started soft, and then it grew louder and louder and louder, so that everybody was in this huge unison of yelling out this mantra. And photographers were snapping pictures, and these were, you know, photographers I'd never seen. I just assumed they were from magazines and newspapers from all over the peninsula. And then Mr. Jones had us sit at attention to wait for the party leader, and in the front of the room was a television set, you know, with probably a 19-inch screen. And he said, the party leader's going to come on any minute now, and he left the room with it on, and it was just snow.
His bodyguards went out of the room, the reporters went out of the room, and there were all of these people looking at snow on a TV screen, and it was 12 o'clock.
And you're looking around, and suddenly Jones isn't there, and you're beginning to freak out. No guards, no Jones, static on the tube.
I looked around, and all I could see were gray faces, and everybody zombie-like, staring at the screen, waiting for something to happen.
And it was like a pressure cooker, and we all felt like something was really wrong. The TV wasn't working, the teacher wasn't here, the guards were gone, and basically the students were sitting in here alone.
Everybody looked like they were dead. And my mind flipped to like the Jews in the concentration camp, being told they're going to a room to take a shower, doors shutting, and then the pellets being dropped from the pipes up above, and I thought we were trapped. I went into a panic. I stood up and I said, I'm getting the hell out of here.
We basically panicked. In my case, it was like, something's very wrong here. I got to get out of here.
I just remember Steve Cornelio and we just ran out.
And we raced towards the doors. I fully expected it to be locked.
And so I headed out that back door as fast as I could in a panic.
I tore out of there. I ran down the stairs.
You've got 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out the door, and then all the lights came on.
And it was Mr. Jones standing in the back of the room, and he turned on the lights. And he slowly walked forward to the front of the room, and he looked shaken.
I remember this sickening silence in the room. It was almost like a sweating room. It just got hotter and hotter as this particular leader did not appear. And then to release that tension, I remember having the students whisper some of our edicts, like strength through discipline, strength through community, strength through action. And I remember them louder, sitting at attention with their feet flat against the floor and their back straight, you know, strength through discipline, strength through community, bam, bam, bam. And then I remember this thing flickering in there as these students waited for this leader to appear. There was nothing, just this static.
Somebody yelled out, "There is no party leader."
At that point, I snapped on this visual, and it was Hitler, and it was the Holocaust, and it was bodies and hollowed eyes, and the horror that we had fallen victim to.
And he sat in the chair and just said, what I have witnessed for the last week and a half, or week, whatever it was, what I have witnessed has really sickened me.
Because we were no better or worse than the Germans. We were just like them. We'd work on the defense plants. We would witness this desolation. We're just like them.
You had to be there to see people crying, horribly, and shocked. The look of shock was like the earth was ending, and they didn't know what to do. People couldn't walk. They were sitting down in the chairs, and Some people wanted to leave, didn't know whether to leave or not.
The lights were out as people were leaving. I remember some students crying, some students having to hold each other. I remember one guy walking by going, "Oh, I knew it was a joke all along." I don't think he felt that way, honestly.
People took it serious, and then they found that this, what they did, they were not proud of. I think that's what hurt a lot of the people, and that they could be taken. Nobody likes to be taken.
One of the lessons we learned is that in our class, what you were being threatened with was your grade, but in real life, in a dictatorship, what you're threatened with is your life.
I hate to think that I go through life thinking it's all about me, but this was such a moment. When someone came to get me to say it's over, I thought, oh, they found me out. But in fact, the movement was over, and she was calling me back to the classroom. When I came back to the classroom, my memory of the students were that they looked like mirages, a mirage on the highway in the hot summer, the shaking appearance. That's my memory of the students. They seemed to be trembling. Some of them seemed so shaky that if you just did that to them, they'd fall over.
I had that moment of total panic and, in my own uneducated way, empathy towards victims of a Nazi third wave-like regime.
I'm half German, and my name Hess is, my maiden name Hess is very German. And so there have always been issues about how could this happen to the German people? How could they do this? I remember when I was a young child, a Jewish boy in our neighborhood giving us a very hard time that, the Germans could have done something and they could have thrown a brick or something. Like there was some feeling of like, there should have been something we could have done. And even though all my grandparents were born here, I still had this feeling of like, in my body even, that there's something about being German that was so shameful because this thing had happened and the German people didn't stop it. And then here we were, and all educated in recent history, this thing having happened, and here it was happening, it seemed to be like it's happening again. Oh my God, how could this happen?
I believe it was one of the greatest lessons I've ever been taught, was not to be controlled, not to do anything that you honestly within your own heart think you shouldn't do.
Anybody can be drawn in and become a part, just like they did in Germany. And I think that was the most enlightening part about the whole experiment, was you're no different than the next person.
Anybody who is zealous about their cause, or anybody who's following a charismatic leader, to me, is suspect, especially after this experience. I believe in middle ground and compromise, not firmly entrenched extreme positions. And a crowd of people with an extreme position I find very scary.
With the right manipulations, any population, no matter how educated and intelligent and liberal and free-thinking and wanting good, we all wanted good things. We were very idealistic, can be turned and manipulated into something that's could be very dangerous.
We should be wary of being too gullible. If Ron Jones, his behavior after, taught me anything, it's how possible it is to manipulate the media, especially if someone's got charisma, writes well, and has an axe to grind and a profit motive.
For some people, the world is filled only with prisoners and guards, power and powerlessness. And you have a choice. You want to be powerless or you want to be powerful? Everybody wants to be more powerful than powerless. And the question is, what are you willing to pay? What are you willing to do to go from being powerless to being powerful? And for most people, it's an awful lot. They're willing to transgress a lot of personal values to step across the line.
Am I glad that I experienced this? I don't know where the wave of emotion comes from, apropos word, but yes, I'm so incredibly grateful for the experience, and it was so important in my life and continues to be.
It's my belief that it's in all of us. If you are strong enough to realize it's in you also when you say, oh, you poor fool, it could only happen to you. If you can turn around in your own private moment and say, God, I guess I could have done this too. It could have happened to me. Maybe there's some hope that it won't happen again.